Nature and Nurture, the book talks a little bit about the epigenetic view, and so this is the idea that development is a result of an ongoing bidirectional exchange between your heredity and the environment. Related to this, the idea of the interaction between genes and your environment. As an example of this, the idea that they go together is 5-HTT-LPR. So this is a gene that is linked to depression. And what happens is people that have this gene, if they start to experience a lot of stressors, essentially that gene will activate. And so you have the gene, and then you have these stressors in the environment, and then those two together can produce depression. Now, if you are not exposed to a lot of stressors, you might not have depression. Not necessarily to say that you'll definitely have depression if you have the gene and you have stressors, but you are more likely according to some of the research. Also kind of related to this, the idea that your genes can provide a range for some of the things, how you're going to develop. For example, intelligence. So your genes are going to provide this range. Maybe you're going to have an IQ from 85 to 115. And then is the environmental experiences that you have that are going to, where you're going to end up. Are you going to end up closer to 85 or 115? Do you go to good schools? Do you have good parents? Things of that nature. If you do, maybe you're going to end up more towards 115. If you go to bad schools, if you don't have parents that look out for you, maybe you're going to have an IQ closer to 85. So genes provide this range, and then the environment helps you to hone in on where you're going to end up at. Yeah, so if you go to better schools, if you have novel environments is another one, a variety of toys, better teachers, all those could help you to get to that higher end of that range. Figure 2.8 talks about the growth and the trimesters of prenatal development. So if you'd like to look through that, it's kind of interesting. I have a video that goes through that on a later slide. If you wanted to look at that, you could. Something that you should know at this point, this was one of my, this was my niece. And so that's her with my sister. She was born what's called backwards, essentially, breech. And so this is where the position in the uterus, it causes the buttocks, is how they word it, the buttocks to be the first part that comes out. And so you don't want that to happen because you could get tangled up in the umbilical cord and, it could cause you to suffocate. So a lot of times when a baby is breech, turned around the wrong way, what they will do is do a C-section to, cut the baby out so that they can avoid maybe getting choked on the umbilical cord. It turns out that if you have one C-section, if you have one baby that's breech, a lot of times you're going to have other babies that are breech too. And so, yeah, that's one of the reasons that you're going to want to do some diagnostic testing, because you want to know if your baby's breech. There's a whole bunch of other things that you're going to want to know. And so, yeah, it's definitely important to take care of your prenatal visits. This is the video, and I'll post it alongside the slides that goes through essentially figure 2.8. A couple of other things as far as prenatal development. Teratogens. So these are agents that can cause birth defects. And so the things that can cause birth defects, you might actually be surprised. So for example, Accutane, it can cause some really serious birth defects. So that's a really important one. But then there are things that are more innocuous and seem more innocuous in our society. They're more prevalent in our society that can influence development as well. Psychoactive drugs. So these can influence and they cause changes in consciousness, perceptions, and moods. That's what psychoactive drugs do. They can also influence development. So for example, alcohol. This is a huge one. It's possible for a lot of cases, if you drink too much while you're pregnant, it's going to cause fetal alcohol syndrome, which is just horrible for babies to go through. So how much do they say? How much alcohol should you consume while you're pregnant? You've probably heard different answers to this question. Right now, the consensus is that you should consume no alcohol. So some people say maybe 1 or 2 glasses of wine here and there. I believe that the consensus, again, this is something that changes, but the consensus right now seems to be have no alcohol while you're pregnant. For some of you, it's like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. I just won't drink any beer. I won't drink any wine. That's fine. According to the FDA, though, how much caffeine should you have while you're pregnant? According to them, you should also have none. So for some of you, that would be much more difficult to not have any caffeine. You might be able to go without alcohol just fine, but the idea of, oh, no more coffee, that's going to be more of a difficult sell. Obviously, you're not going to want to do cocaine and heroin while you're pregnant. So yes, these are teratogens. These are things that can influence development in a negative way, things that you don't want to expose your baby to. The last couple slides, there's not a lot on that. In the test, if you wanted to look through it, it's other things as far as going to the doctor. And some of these things we'll talk about a little bit later on, like maternal age. Paternal age actually matters a little bit too. And then bonding, yes, we'll talk a little bit more about that next chapter. But we talked a little bit about it last chapter, the idea of the bonding hypothesis. The idea that there's a critical period that you need to be in contact with your baby to get a secure attachment. Some research shows, though, that, let's say if your baby, it has to be in the ICU and you can't touch them for a little while. There's been some research that shows that that's not necessarily the end-all be-all. It's like they'll never be okay after that. The idea that as soon as you can touch them, as soon as you can hold them, as soon as you can bond with them, that yes, you should do that. There's a little bit also on postpartum, if you'd like to read through that too. It happens for women. It also happens for men. The idea that you're in a relationship together, and so for both of you, it could be stressful. Obviously, it's going to be more significant for the woman because she's going to have the change in hormones and all these different things. A huge problem that we'll talk about more next chapter, this idea of sleep. And so after you've had a baby, you've got to get up and feed this baby every 2 or 3 hours. It just destroys your sleep. And as we'll talk about throughout the lifespan, the idea that sleep is a crucial part in how well you're going to develop and how well you're going to feel and everything. And so after you have a baby, it is really difficult to get the sleep that you need. That's one reason why it's nice to have 2 parents, because you have one parent maybe that can get up during the night, one that does it during the day. Not necessarily 2 parents. Let me rephrase that. 2 people. So like for, I have a kid now, he's a step kid. When he was born, it was just his mom, and so she was taking care of him a lot, but her mom was here with her to help. So her mom, grandma, would stay up overnight and take care of the feedings, while Virginie would take care of Leif during the day. So, all right. Got off on a little bit of a tangent there. That is chapter 2. We'll get into chapter 3, which is infancy, which is what a lot of you probably think of more as the developmental psych in chapter 3. Thank you very much for listening.